Officer Derek Boone didn't just walk into Summit Valley Medical Center's emergency department. He owned it. Shoulder checking a paramedic, shoving a gurney aside, badge out, voice up, eyes scanning for whoever he could put in their place fastest. He found her immediately, a quiet nurse with tired eyes and a clipboard standing near Trauma Bay 2. She wasn't loud. She wasn't arguing. She was just there, doing her job. So Boone pointed at her. "Hey, you, hospital girl, back up. This is police business now." Emily Carter looked at him once. Steady, unhurried. She had seen far worse than Derek Boone. In places he would never survive a single day. If this story already has you hooked, follow the channel right now, hit like, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's get into it. This is a work of complete fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely imaginary. Part 2. The morning had started badly before Boone ever walked through those doors. Summit Valley Medical Center sat on the eastern edge of Ashford City, a mid-sized hospital that handled more trauma than its size had any right to absorb. It wasn't a level 1 center. That was Meridian General across town, bigger, better funded, with a helipad that actually worked year-round. Summit Valley was the place people ended up when traffic was bad or the situation was too unstable to travel further. It handled warehouse injuries, car accidents on Route 9, the occasional gunshot from the Delwood neighborhood 3 miles west. The ER staff were good at working with less. They had to be. Emily Carter had been working the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift for the past 11 days straight, covering for 2 nurses out with the flu and one who'd quit without notice 2 weeks back. She was 31 years old, 5'6", and moved through the trauma wing with the kind of quiet economy that comes from years of doing things right the first time. She didn't talk much during shifts. She didn't need to. The other nurses had learned to watch where Emily positioned herself in a room. If she drifted toward a patient, something was usually wrong before the monitors confirmed it. She had been at Summit Valley for 14 months. Before that, there was a gap in her employment record that she didn't discuss. HR had noted it. Her supervisor, charge nurse Patrice Odom, had asked about it exactly once during the onboarding interview. Emily had said, "I was in the military." Patrice had waited for more. Emily had smiled politely and looked at the next question on the form. That was the end of that. By 9:40 a.m., the ER was already running at 80% capacity. 3 beds held flu cases that should have gone to urgent care, but hadn't. Room 6 had a teenage boy with a broken wrist from a skateboarding fall, his mother hovering anxiously in the doorway. Trauma Bay 1 held a 44-year-old construction worker named Marcus Webb, who'd taken a steel beam across his left shoulder on a site off Caldwell Avenue. The orthopedic consult was running late. Emily had already assessed him twice, repositioned his immobilization, and noted something in his left chest wall that she quietly flagged to the attending physician on duty, Dr. Gavin Price. Price was 48, overworked, and had the distracted energy of a man who'd been fighting with hospital administration about staffing ratios for 6 months. He glanced at Emily's note, said, "I'll check it," and moved on to the next patient. He hadn't checked it. Emily wrote it in the chart again, more specifically this time, and went back to her other tasks. She was doing a medication reconciliation near the nurses' station when the ambulance bay doors banged open at 10:12 a.m. 2 uniformed Ashford City police officers walked in ahead of the gurney. The paramedics behind them were pushing fast. The patient, a man in his 30s, was handcuffed to the rail with one wrist, his other hand pressed against a blood-soaked cloth wrapped around his left forearm. He was alert, sweating, his eyes moving quick and nervous around the room. The first officer through the door was average height, average build, nothing remarkable. He stepped aside to let the gurney pass and spoke quietly with the triage nurse. The second officer was Derek Boone. He entered like a man who expected the room to rearrange itself. 6 feet, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of face that had learned early that size was a social shortcut. He was maybe 38, and the way he moved said he'd never once had to reconsider a first impression. His eyes went around the ER in the way cops sometimes do, categorizing, ranking, deciding who mattered and who didn't. "Who's the charge nurse?" he said. Not asked. Said. Patrice Odom was at the far end of the station, on the phone with radiology. She held up one finger without turning around. Boone didn't like that. His jaw tightened. Hey, louder. I need a room. This is a police matter. The suspect needs to be... Sir? The triage nurse, a young man named Felipe, stepped forward. We'll get your patient assessed. Can you give us the... I'm not talking to you. Boone pointed past Felipe toward the main trauma corridor. Who's running this department right now? Emily had watched this for approximately 45 seconds. She set down her clipboard and walked over because Felipe was newer and Boone was already crowding him. The attending is Dr. Price, she said. He'll be with your patient as soon as... Boone looked at her. One of those looks, top to bottom, fast, finishing with the kind of dismissal that doesn't bother to hide itself. And you are? Emily Carter. I'm a trauma nurse. If you can tell me the mechanism of injury on your patient, I can start. What I need, Boone said, stepping around her toward the corridor, is for the medical staff to handle this, and the support staff to stay out of the way. He said support staff with particular emphasis, like the phrase was a demotion. Emily said, I am medical staff. He turned back. The look on his face was almost amused. Okay, all right. He gestured vaguely at her scrubs, her badge, her entire existence. Look, sweetheart, I've got a custodial prisoner with a laceration who needs to be stitched up and cleared so I can process him. I don't need a whole production. Just get me a room, get me a doctor, and here's the important part, stay in your lane. The nurse's station went quiet. Felipe looked at the floor. 2 nurses in the corridor had stopped moving. Emily looked at Boone for a moment. Not up at him. She was shorter, but there was nothing in her posture that acknowledged that. She looked at him the way you look at a weather pattern. Assessing. Not alarmed. My lane, she said evenly, is keeping people alive. Boone's almost amusement sharpened into something harder. He opened his mouth, and then every radio in the department went off simultaneously. The call came in at 10:17 a.m., and it came in wrong, fragmented, overlapping, 2 dispatch voices cutting over each other, words dropping in and out. Multiple casualties, Route 9 overpass. Tanker fire, possible structural. Requesting all available units. ETA first wave, 8 minutes. Patrice hung up her phone without finishing her call to radiology. Dr. Price appeared from room 4 with his stethoscope still in his hand. The overhead intercom crackled and then, Code Orange, Emergency Department, Code Orange. All trauma personnel to designated stations immediately. What that meant was, something had gone badly wrong, there were too many people hurt to count yet, and Summit Valley was about to become the nearest available option for all of them. Patrice moved to the center of the nurse's station with the particular energy of someone shifting gears. Listen up, she said, her voice carrying across the department. Code Orange, mass-casualty protocol, Amberlin. Start clearing non-critical from rooms 2 through 5. Jake, get me 2 more crash carts staged. Dr. Price, I need you on the phone with the surgical floor right now. She looked around. Emily, already on it, Emily said. She was pulling supply carts before Patrice finished the sentence. Boone was still standing in the middle of the corridor. What's happening? He said. There's been an incident on Route 9, Patrice said. She was already moving away from him. We need the corridor clear, officer. What kind of incident? Nobody answered him because nobody had time. The first ambulance arrived at 10:24 a.m. Then the second, 40 seconds later. Then 2 more together, and then it stopped being ambulances and started being a continuous stream of people moving fast through doors that weren't staying closed anymore. Route 9 had a 4-level interchange where it crossed above the Delwood rail yard, and at 10:09 a.m., a commercial fuel tanker had blown a rear axle on the upper deck, crossed 3 lanes, hit the center divider, and ruptured. The subsequent explosion had taken out the eastern guardrail on 2 levels and dropped debris onto a section of road below during a heavy morning commute. 14 vehicles were involved in the initial chain reaction. The fire had spread to the infrastructure supports before crews arrived. By the time the first units reached the scene, there were bodies on 2 levels of highway and people trapped in vehicles with fire moving toward them. Summit Valley's ER was 0.8 of a mile from the nearest Route 9 on-ramp. The first patient through the door was a woman in her 50s, partial burns across her right arm and neck, screaming with a coherence that meant she was stable but terrified. Emily moved to her before the paramedics finished their handoff. "I've got her," Emily said to the paramedics, already checking the burn distribution with gloved hands, talking to the woman in a low voice. "You're here. You're inside. We have you. Can you tell me your name?" While simultaneously reading the incoming paperwork with her other hand. The second patient was worse. Male, early 40s, blunt chest trauma, breath sounds diminished on the right side, blood pressure starting to drop. The paramedics were halfway through their report when Emily interrupted. "Tension pneumo," she said. "We need Bay 1. Needle decompression. Now." The paramedics stopped mid-sentence. "We hadn't confirmed. His trachea is deviating left," Emily said. "Breath sounds are absent right side. BP is 80 over palp. JVD is starting. Call it." Dr. Price appeared at her shoulder. He looked at the patient for exactly 2 seconds. "Bay 1, he said. "Emily, you're with me." They moved. Boone had backed himself against the wall near the ambulance bay, which was the right instinct. Stay out of the way. But then a third ambulance came in and the crew moved fast and clipped his arm, and he stepped forward instead of further back. And suddenly he was in the middle of the corridor where people with gurneys were trying to move. "Sir," Felipe said, appearing beside him, "I need you to move to the family waiting area. I have a prisoner in that room." Boone pointed at room 3, where his suspect had been taken 15 minutes ago and apparently forgotten about. "Your prisoner is stable and has a nurse with him. Sir, please, don't please me." Boone's voice had gone up slightly. The chaos had rattled something in him. He was the kind of man who handled control well and handled the absence of it poorly. "I have a legal obligation to maintain custody of that individual. I cannot be—" "Then stand in the room with him," Felipe said, with a firmness that surprised both of them. "Not in the hallway." Boone moved toward room 3. Then he stopped. Through the window of Trauma Bay 1, he could see Emily Carter. She was standing at the patient's right side, moving with a speed and precision that didn't look like anything he'd seen in an emergency room before. No wasted motion, nothing performed or panicked. She called for a large bore needle, received it, found the landmark on the patient's chest wall in under 5 seconds, and placed the decompression needle cleanly. The sound that followed, a rush of air, a visible relaxation in the patient's accessory muscles, was immediate. The monitors began to stabilize. Dr. Price said something to her that Boone couldn't hear through the glass. Emily shook her head slightly, pointed at the patient's left wrist, said something back. Price nodded, ordered something. The team moved. Boone stood in the corridor and watched the nurse he'd called Sweetheart work, and something shifted behind his expression in a way he would not have admitted to. He moved into room 3. Checked. For the next 40 minutes, Summit Valley's emergency department ran at a pitch that the staff would describe later in different words, all meaning the same thing. We did not think we were going to hold. 11 patients came through the ambulance bay in the first hour. 3 were critical. 2 of the critical cases required procedures that pushed against the boundaries of what the ER was equipped to handle. Not because the staff wasn't capable, but because the volume was compressing the timeline for everything, and equipment was being shared and restocked and shared again, and the surgical floor was overwhelmed trying to receive transfers from Meridian General, which was already at capacity from a separate incident the night before. Emily moved between patients with a triage logic that was faster and more accurate than anything the attending physicians had seen from a floor nurse. It wasn't magic, she wasn't guessing. She was reading physiologic signs in the order and combination that military combat medicine teaches you to read them. Because in combat medicine, you often don't have labs or imaging or time. You have eyes and hands and pattern recognition built across years of seeing people hurt in ways that kill fast. She caught a developing compartment syndrome in a crash victim's left leg before the vascular surgeon had been paged. She identified a splenic injury in a woman who'd walked in under her own power, appearing only mildly distressed because Emily noticed the subtle guarding pattern in the way the woman moved and the exact location of her pain response. She flagged it to Dr. Price, who ordered a fast ultrasound, which confirmed free fluid in the abdomen. The woman went to the OR 40 minutes later. She would not have gone to the OR at all if Emily hadn't been in the corridor when she walked in. Boone emerged from room 3 at one point to find a different hospital. The ER he'd walked into that morning, manageable, slightly understaffed, easy to dominate, was now running on pure organized urgency, every hallway occupied, every room in use, and somewhere in the middle of it, Emily Carter was moving like a fixed point while everything else spun around her. He told himself he was watching to make sure his prisoner wasn't transferred without his knowledge. That was not entirely true. At 11:43 a.m., one of the paramedic crews brought in a patient that caused a problem. 41-year-old male, suspected cardiac arrest in the field, ROSC, achieved en route, but the patient's rhythm was unstable, and the paramedics had lost IV access during transport. They came through the bay doors moving fast and calling for the team. Boone was in the wrong place again. He'd stepped out of room 3 to ask Felipe something about documentation, and the gurney caught the edge of the door frame behind him and ricocheted slightly left, into Boone's arm. Boone reacted on instinct. He stepped back and sideways, and his sideways step took him directly into Emily's path as she moved to intercept the incoming patient. They collided. Not hard, but Emily's supply tray went sideways, and 2 syringes hit the floor. "Watch it," Boone said reflexively. Emily didn't respond to that. She looked at the syringes on the floor, both capped, neither visibly compromised, assessed them in under a second, left them, and reached for replacements from the cart beside her. 3 seconds of work. Then she was moving again. "I need a line, and I need it now," she said to the paramedic team, and they parted for her. Boone picked up one of the syringes. "Habit, maybe." He held it toward her. "These are yours." "They're contaminated," Emily said without looking up. "Toss them." "I just picked them up. They're capped." "The floor is contaminated, officer. Please move back." Her voice was not unkind. It was the tone of someone explaining something that should not require explanation to someone who should not still be standing there. Boone put the syringe down on the nearest surface. 2 nurses exchanged a glance. Emily had the line in 40 seconds. The patient's rhythm stabilized within 3 minutes of arriving in Bay 2. Dr. Price, passing through, looked at the monitor, looked at Emily, and said, "Good catch on the approach." "Tachycardia was there in the field report," Emily said. "Suspected demand ischemia." Price nodded and kept moving. Boone, still in the corridor, heard every word of that exchange. Quiet. It was 12:20 p.m. when Boone made his second mistake of the day, which was worse than the first because he made it in front of witnesses who were already watching him. A family member, the wife of one of the crash victims, had gotten past the waiting room and was in the treatment corridor, distressed, asking for her husband. It happened in mass-casualty situations. Security was stretched, the waiting room was overwhelmed, and people in enough fear found ways through doors they shouldn't be able to get through. Boone found her in the corridor and made the reasonable choice, which was to stop her. He identified himself, told her she needed to go back to the waiting area, and when she became more upset and tried to move past him, he put his hand on her arm. Emily came around the corner from Bay 3. She took in the scene in less than 2 seconds. Woman in distress, Boone's hand on her arm, the angle of his body blocking her exit, the woman's face. "Officer." Emily's voice was level. "Take your hand off her." Boone looked up. "I'm handling it." "You're restraining a civilian in a medical facility." Emily stepped forward, not running, just moving with a directness that reduced the distance between them quickly. "Let go of her arm." "She's a trespasser in a restricted area. She's the wife of a man in Bay 4. Emily looked at the woman directly. "Ma'am, I'll take you to him right now. He's stable." Back to Boone, same tone. "Either help or get out of my trauma bay." The corridor had 4 other people in it. All 4 of them were watching. Boone released the woman's arm, slowly. He looked at Emily with something that had moved well past dismissal now. It was something more complicated. Something that had irritation at its surface, but something closer to recalibration underneath. "You got a problem with me, nurse?" "I have a problem with what you're doing," Emily said. She put her hand on the woman's shoulder and started walking her toward Bay 4. "Not the same thing." She didn't look back at him. One of the nurses at the station, a veteran named Sandra who'd been at Summit Valley for 9 years, watched Boone's face while Emily walked away. Sandra had seen that look before. Not often. It was the look of a man who had just, for the first time in a long time, run up against something he didn't know how to categorize. He didn't like it. The body camera footage, which would later become relevant in ways Boone could not have anticipated, captured what happened at 12:58 p.m. There was a lull, brief, relative, in the patient flow. The worst of the initial wave had been triaged and routed. The department was still running high, but the acute crisis of the first 90 minutes had compressed into something more manageable. 3 staff members were on what passed for a break, standing in the corridor with coffee cups they weren't really drinking from, shoulders still tight, brains still running fast. Emily was writing in a chart at the nurse's station. She'd been on her feet for the better part of 7 hours before the code orange started and had not sat down since. Boone walked up to the station. "I want to file a formal complaint," he said, "against her." He pointed at Emily. Patrice Odom, who had appeared from somewhere during the lull, looked at him. "Against Nurse Carter. She obstructed police procedure twice today. She interfered with... She redirected a family member to her husband's room," Patrice said. "She touched my arm," Boone said. "And she..." "Excuse me?" Patrice's eyebrows moved. He paused, recalibrating his framing. "She repeatedly interfered with my lawful handling of a situation involving a civilian in a restricted medical area. I want that documented." Emily had not looked up from her chart. "You have every right to file a formal complaint," Patrice said. Her voice was entirely neutral. It was the neutrality of someone who was making very deliberate choices about what to do with their energy. "I'll get you the form." "I also want it noted," Boone continued, his voice gaining some of its earlier confidence back, "that she has an attitude problem with law enforcement. This woman," he gestured again toward Emily, "has been combative since I walked in." Emily set down her pen. She turned and looked at Boone with the same expression she'd had on her face all morning. Not angry, not hurt. Something very calm and very old. "You called me sweetheart," she said. "You told me to stay in my lane. You grabbed a civilian woman by the arm in a hospital corridor." She picked her pen back up. "I have a shift to finish." Boone's jaw tightened. "I want her name. Full name." "Emily Ann Carter," Emily said without looking up. "Spelled however you like." Boone wrote it in his notebook. He said, "This isn't over." Emily didn't answer. He walked back toward room 3. Sandra, from the far end of the station, watched him go. Then she looked at Emily. Something had shifted in the way Sandra was watching her. Had been shifting for the last 2 hours, actually. Accumulating with each patient and each decision and each moment, Emily had moved through this disaster with that particular quality that Sandra didn't quite have a word for. Not confidence. Confidence was what residents displayed when they were performing for attendings. Not aggression. Not authority, exactly. Familiarity, Sandra thought. Emily moved through crisis the way someone moves through a familiar room in the dark, not because she wasn't afraid, but because the dark was not new to her. Sandra thought about that. She didn't say anything. At 1:34 p.m., the department got quiet in the way it sometimes does after a mass casualty event. Not peaceful, but exhausted. The worst cases were in surgery or the ICU. The moderate cases were being monitored. The walking wounded had been assessed and most had been discharged or were waiting for rides. The Route 9 overpass story was on every television in the waiting room. 12 dead at the scene, 22 hospitalized, scattered across 3 facilities. The structural damage to the interchange was significant enough that Route 9 was expected to stay closed for at least 72 hours. Emily was in the medication room doing a recount when Patrice found her. "Hey," Patrice said. She closed the door. Emily looked up. "Boone filed the complaint," Patrice said. "Administration is going to want to do a formal review." "Okay." "Emily." Patrice hesitated. "You know I'm behind you on this, but he's a police officer and the hospital has relationships with the department, and there are people upstairs who are going to want to smooth this over rather than—" "I know," Emily said. "Do you want to talk to someone? Legal? HR? Whoever?" "I'll talk to whoever I need to," Emily said. She went back to the recount. Patrice stayed in the doorway. 12 patients, she said. You called 3 of them before the attending confirmed them. The splenic bleed, the tension pneumo, The compartment syndrome. She paused. Price told me. Emily didn't respond. Where did you learn to triage like that? Emily counted a row of medications, wrote the number down. I've been doing it a long time, she said. Patrice studied her for a moment, then nodded and left. Emily stood alone in the medication room. The sounds of the department filtered under the door, monitors, voices, the distant announcement of something over the intercom. She pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth, a gesture that lasted less than 2 seconds. Something she'd been holding compressed tighter, and then she released it and went back to counting. She had 3 more hours on her shift. Outside the window, a black SUV with no visible plates and a federal vehicle registration sticker had turned into the hospital parking lot, then a second one, then a third. They parked in the reserved section near the ambulance bay, and 4 people got out of each vehicle, and they were wearing civilian clothes. But they moved in a formation that was not civilian, and the man at the front of the group was wearing the kind of expression that precedes something irreversible. He paused outside the ambulance bay doors, looked at the building, and spoke quietly into a radio. Emily did not see them pull up. She would not see them for another 11 minutes. Boone, coming out of room 3 to finally process his prisoner's transfer paperwork, looked out the window and saw the vehicles. His hand tightened on his clipboard. He had no way of knowing that those vehicles were here for the woman he'd spent his entire morning trying to diminish. Nobody in Summit Valley did. Not yet. The 11 minutes passed the way minutes do when the body is running on the last edge of its reserves, too fast and too slow at the same time. Emily finished the medication recount, logged the numbers, and came back out into the department. The afternoon light had shifted through the high windows of the corridor, going flat and yellow the way it does in February, when the sun is low and the warmth it suggests is entirely false. She picked up the next chart from the rack by force of habit. A 40-year-old woman in room 7, presenting with laceration to the scalp from the accident site, mild concussion suspected, waiting for neurocheck. Routine, relative to the morning. Emily moved toward room 7. She was 3 steps down the corridor when Felipe appeared at her side, slightly breathless. There are people at the front, he said. What kind of people? He hesitated. Military kind of people? Emily stopped walking. Not a dramatic stop, not a freeze, more like the half-second pause of someone who has just heard something that reorganizes the next few minutes without changing the expression on their face. Where? She said. Lobby. They asked for you by name. Full name. Felipe looked like he wanted to ask a question, but hadn't figured out which one yet. The one in front, he's got that thing, where you can tell they're in charge, but they're not saying it. Emily handed him back the chart. Tell room 7 I'll be 5 minutes late. She walked toward the lobby. There were 12 of them, which was more than necessary, and therefore a statement. 4 had stayed with the vehicles. 8 had come inside, and they were distributed through the lobby the way trained people distribute themselves in unfamiliar spaces, sight lines covered, exits noted, no clustering. They were in civilian clothes, every one of them, but civilian clothes on those frames, with those postures and those eyes, functioned as approximately the thinnest possible disguise. The man at the front was in his mid-50s, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had been weathered past the point where age was particularly legible on it. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt, and he was standing in the middle of the lobby's open space as though he'd arranged the room around himself. He saw Emily come through the internal doors, and his posture changed in a way that was almost invisible. Emily crossed the lobby toward him. She was still in her scrubs, her ID badge slightly crooked from the morning, a dried spot of someone else's blood on her left sleeve that she hadn't noticed yet. Sergeant Voss, she said. It's Colonel now, he said. Been a while. It has. They didn't shake hands. They looked at each other the way people do when a shared history is too complicated to summarize with a gesture. Walk with me a minute, he said. I have a patient in 7. 5 minutes. She walked with him toward the far corner of the lobby, away from the others. Around them, the normal afternoon traffic of a hospital lobby moved and eddied. A family near the elevator, an elderly man with a walker, a volunteer in a green vest staffing the information desk. None of them knew what was standing in their lobby. How'd you find me? Emily said. Not hostile, just asking. You were never hidden, Voss said. We knew where you landed, we just didn't have a reason to come until now. And now you have a reason. He looked at her steadily. The incident this morning, Route 9. Emily waited. One of the casualties from the overpass was a federal contractor, Dr. Alton Marsh, civilian advisor attached to a special operations logistics program. Classified work. Voss kept his voice low and unhurried. We need someone to liaise with the trauma team on his care. Someone with the clearance level and the medical background to be inside the room without creating a disclosure problem. He's here? At Summit Valley? Meridian was at capacity. They rerouted. A brief pause. He came in about 40 minutes ago. He's critical. Emily absorbed that. Who's managing him? You're Dr. Price, currently, but Price doesn't have the context. He doesn't know what Marsh was involved in or why it matters. We need eyes in that room that we can trust. I'm a floor nurse, Colonel. I don't have... You have more than Price, Voss said. You also have the clearance, which is still active. That surprised her slightly. She'd assumed it had lapsed. Administrative technicality, Voss said, reading her expression. It never got formally closed out. He let that sit for a second. I'm not asking you to do anything outside your role. Stay with Marsh's care team. Flag anything that doesn't look right medically or otherwise. That's it. Emily looked across the lobby at the other men. One of them was watching the main entrance with the focused inattention of someone who was watching everything. Another was near the hallway leading to the ER, just standing. This isn't only about Marsh, she said. Voss didn't answer right away. There are elements of Marsh's situation that are still unresolved, he said finally. Some of those elements may have followed him here. Emily looked at him directly. You think someone from the incident is still a threat? I think we don't know what we don't know, Voss said. And I'd rather have you in that room than someone we need to brief from scratch. Emily was quiet for a moment. Down the hall, she could see room 7's door closed, waiting. She could see the nurse's station where Sandra was working, and the ambulance bay beyond it, where the morning's damage was still being processed in paperwork and phone calls, and the particular specific grief of staff who had held their composure through the crisis and were now starting to understand what it had cost them. And somewhere in the hospital behind her, Officer Derek Boone was still on the premises, processing his prisoner's transfer, carrying a filed complaint with her name on it. All right, Emily said. Voss nodded once. Thank you, Carter. Don't thank me yet, she said. I need to check on room 7 first. He kicked. She was in room 7 for 6 minutes. The woman's name was Renata Solano, and she had a 2-inch laceration across her hairline and a headache she rated as 8 out of 10, and she was more worried about whether anyone had reached her daughter's school than she was about herself, which Emily had learned was a reliable indicator that the concussion was mild. Emily cleaned the wound, confirmed that the neurological checks were appropriate, ordered the imaging that the attending should have ordered 40 minutes ago, and squeezed Renata's hand once before she left. Your daughter's school is already contacted, Emily said at the door. The front desk called them at noon. She knows you're okay. Renata's face did something complicated. How did you know to... You mentioned her 3 times in the first 2 minutes, Emily said. We pay attention. She went back into the corridor. The dynamic in the department had shifted. Word had spread fast in the way it always does in hospitals. Not through announcements, but through the specific social conduction of people who work in close quarters, noticing something new and transmitting that noticing in glances and pauses and the slight change of velocity when you pass someone in a hallway. The federal people were here. That was the news, unnamed and unconfirmed, moving through the department like a current, and they were here for Carter. Sandra caught Emily's arm as she passed the nurse's station. What's going on? It's work, Emily said. Emily? Sandra's voice was quieter. Is it the Marsh patient they brought in? Because that guy came in flagged somehow. They cleared Bay 2 for him specifically, and Price has been in there for 20 minutes with the door. I'm going to Bay 2, Emily said. Sandra held her eyes for a second. You're going to be okay? It was such a human question in the middle of everything that Emily almost didn't know how to answer it. Yeah, she said. She kept walking. Boone saw her cross the department toward Bay 2. He saw the federal personnel, hard to miss once you knew to look, positioned at intervals that were not random. He saw Voss standing near the ambulance bay entrance, watching everything with the quiet authority of a man who had decided something and was now simply waiting for it to complete. And he felt the first real formless premonition of something that he had not felt since a situation 6 years ago in Delwood that had gone wrong in a way that had taken him 6 months to live down. He stopped a nurse he didn't know. "Who are those people?" The nurse looked at where he was pointing. "No idea." "Federal?" "I said I don't know." The nurse moved away. Boone found Felipe. "The guys in the lobby, who called them?" Felipe looked at Boone with a new quality of expression. Something had changed in how Felipe was looking at him since the corridor incident with Renata Solano's husband's wife, though Boone hadn't noticed that until now. "I don't know who they are," Felipe said. "They asked for Emily, and she came out to meet them." "She knows them?" "Seemed like it." Boone watched the door to Bay 2. He could see the edge of Price's coat through the small window in the door. He couldn't see Emily. "What's in Bay 2?" he asked. Felipe just looked at him. "A patient," he said, and went back to his work. Chut-chut. Bay 2 smelled like antiseptic and the particular metallic undercurrent of blood that doesn't fully clear, even after cleaning. Alton Marsh was 53 years old, and he looked older than that now. Gray-faced, intubated, both arms with lines, a chest tube on the right side draining serosanguineous fluid. His injuries from the explosion were significant: bilateral pulmonary contusions, a grade 3 liver laceration being managed non-operatively under intense monitoring, and a closed head injury that hadn't declared itself fully yet. Price was at the bedside reviewing numbers when Emily came in. He looked up. "Carter?" He seemed mildly surprised. "I thought you were on room 7. "Finished? I'm being assigned to this case as a secondary." She didn't elaborate. "What's his pressure doing?" Price handed her the most recent vitals sheet. "Stable but fragile. The laceration is the thing I'm watching. Any drop in pressure, and we lose the window to manage it conservatively." Emily studied the sheet. She looked at Marsh's face. Slack, sedated, the tube taped carefully at the corner of his mouth. She didn't know him. She knew the type of work he'd done generally, in the way that people who work adjacent to classified operations know things in outline without knowing them in detail. She knew he mattered to people who mattered to things that she didn't have the full picture of, and she knew that his being here at Summit Valley in Bay 2, with federal personnel standing in the lobby, meant that the morning had become something other than what it had started as. "His last lactate?" she asked. 2.4, trending down. "Good." She set the vital sheet down. "I want to be notified if there's any pressure change, any change in drain output, any agitation when sedation lightens." "You'll be here?" "Close," she said. She left Bay 2 and found Voss in the corridor. "He's stable," she said. "For now. The liver is the risk." Voss nodded. "The situation outside is also developing." "What does that mean?" He looked past her shoulder briefly, a scan, the kind she recognized. "We had a second vehicle from the overpass site that wasn't accounted for in the initial incident report. We think it wasn't an accident. Marsh may have been targeted." Emily went still. "You're saying the explosion—" "We don't know what we're saying yet. That's why we need eyes on him and why we need people here who understand the picture." He paused. "This facility may need to go into a modified security protocol. I've already spoken with your administrator." "Does Patrice know?" "She will, in the next 10 minutes. Emily processed that. Around them, the department continued its afternoon pace, patients moving, nurses charting, the everyday machinery of a hospital running over the top of something that had quietly become much larger than a morning shift and a code orange. "One more thing," Voss said. She looked at him. "I understand there was an incident earlier with one of the Ashford City officers." Emily's expression didn't change. "He filed a complaint against me." "I'm aware." "It's being handled through the hospital's process." Voss looked at her for a moment with the particular quality of someone who has more to say and is deciding how much of it to say. "The body camera footage from this morning has been flagged by our team as potentially relevant to the investigation of the security context surrounding Marsh's arrival." Emily looked at him. "You're saying his cameras were running?" All Ashford City officers' cameras are running continuously during active duty, Voss said. That footage is now evidence in a federal security review. Emily understood what he wasn't saying. The footage of Boone in the emergency department, every corridor moment, every interaction, everything he'd said and done and where he'd positioned himself, was now inside a federal record. Colonel? She kept her voice even. That's not why I need this handled. I know that, Voss said. He didn't say it gently. He said it the way people say things that are true. But it may be how it gets handled anyway. Down the hall, the door to administration swung open, and two people Emily recognized from the executive floor came out looking like they'd just received information that had shifted the afternoon considerably. Behind them, Patrice Odom appeared, moving toward Emily with an expression that mixed about 5 different things in a way that was hard to parse from a distance. And at the nurses' station, Sandra had stopped what she was doing entirely because she was watching Voss. More specifically, she was watching the way Voss was talking to Emily, the way his posture oriented toward her. Not the posture of someone speaking to a floor nurse, the posture of someone who was, there wasn't another word for it, reporting in. Boone had drifted back to the corridor by then. He'd seen Patrice come out. He'd seen the administrators. He'd seen the federal personnel still in position. He saw Voss and Emily. And for the first time since he'd walked into Summit Valley Medical Center that morning, with his hand on his holster and his chin up and the absolute unquestioned assumption of where the power in the room lived, Officer Derek Boone had no idea what was happening. That was new for him. He didn't like what it felt like. Patrice reached Emily and said quietly, but not quietly enough, "They want to do a department briefing. Administrator Kovacs, the federal people, and apparently someone from the district attorney's office is on their way." She looked at Voss and then back at Emily. "Is there something about you that I should have known when I hired you?" Emily looked at Patrice, at the question underneath the question. "Probably," Emily said. Then the door to Bay 2 opened and the monitoring alarm inside went to a continuous tone, and Price's voice came through the door, sharp and immediate. "Carter, pressure's dropping. I need you now." Emily was already moving. Voss watched her go, and there was something in his face that was not quite pride and was not quite worry. It was the expression of a man watching someone do the thing they were built to do, knowing that the doing of it always cost something, and knowing also that she had always been willing to pay it. Behind him, unnoticed, Boone's notebook was open in his hand. He wasn't writing anything. He was just standing there, holding the pen above the page, with the specific stillness of a man whose story about this morning was beginning, quietly and irrevocably, to come apart. The alarm was a continuous 120 beats per minute tone that meant one specific thing. Marcia's blood pressure had fallen below the threshold that made conservative management a viable option. Emily came through the door of Bay 2 moving fast without running, because running in a trauma bay causes people to collide and drop things and make errors, and she had learned that distinction in places where errors had body counts. Price was at the head of the bed already, his hand on Marcia's wrist, his eyes on the monitor with the particular tight focus of a physician who is ahead of the crisis by about 30 seconds and knows that margin is shrinking. "Pressure's 78/40, Price said. "Drain output jumped. Look at that." The chest tube collection chamber had a visible increase in the deep red fluid pooling at the bottom. Not arterial bright, but darker, higher volume than the last check. "The laceration's moving," Emily said. She was already at the IV pole, checking the lines, calculating. "He needs fluid now, and he needs a surgical team standing by. I've got a call in to cut..." "Who?" "Rafferty." Emily knew Rafferty by reputation only. General surgery, competent, slow to commit in ambiguous situations. "Get Morale in here instead. Dr. Una Morale? Trauma surgery. She's faster." Price hesitated for exactly 1 second. In an ordinary shift, that hesitation would have been about hierarchy and consultation protocol. Today, in this room, with Marcia's pressure still dropping on the monitor above them, the hesitation lasted 1 second, and then Price said, "Get Morale," to the nurse at the door, who went. Emily pushed a liter of normal saline wide open through the large bore line, checked the second line, verified it was patent. She leaned over Marsh and checked his pupils with the light from her pen light. Equal, sluggish, not blown. The head injury was still in the picture. still a variable. His last hemoglobin was 9.2, she said. We need to type and cross for 4 units, get the blood bank on the phone, and if his pressure doesn't respond to this fluid, we're transfusing before morale gets here. We're not a trauma center, Emily. We're what he has right now. She looked at Price directly. He cannot be moved, not with a grade 3 elastic that's actively bleeding. Moving him kills him. We stabilize him here until morale can get him to OR. Price looked at the monitor, looked at Marsh, made the calculation that physicians make when the situation has moved past the point where caution is still a form of care. All right, he said. Outside the bay window, Voss had positioned himself where he could see through the glass without being in the way. He watched Emily work with the expression of someone confirming something they already knew. The fluid responded, partly. Marsh's pressure came up to 88/50 over the next 7 minutes, which was enough to step back from the immediate cliff edge, but not enough to feel anything like relief. Emily stayed at the bedside with the second nurse, a quiet, competent young man named Terrence, who had worked with her twice before and had the good sense to anticipate rather than wait. And they managed the lines and the monitoring and the drain output with the specific focused silence of people who have found the working rhythm of a difficult situation. Dr. Una Morale arrived at 1:58 p.m., still in her surgical cap, clearly pulled from something else. She was 44, precise, with the compressed energy of a surgeon who had done enough of these to stop performing confidence and simply operate from it. She came through the bay door, looked at the monitor, looked at the drain, looked at Emily. Walk me through it, she said. Not to Price. To Emily. Emily walked her through it. Grade 3 liver laceration identified on CT at 1:15 p.m., initially hemodynamically stable, managed conservatively. Pressure drop beginning approximately 35 minutes later, drain output increasing, fluid challenge partially responsive. Current pressure 88/50, last lactate 2.4 from 40 minutes ago, repeat pending. Morale listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, Morale looked at the CT images that were up on the wall screen, traced the laceration with one finger without touching the screen. He's going to keep bleeding, she said. Yes, Emily said. Or in 20 minutes. I want him stable enough to make the move. He needs another unit minimum before... I know what he needs. Morale was already moving toward the door. Get the blood. Keep his pressure above 85. If it drops below 80, you call me and we move him bleeding. She left. Price looked at Emily. Something had shifted in how he was looking at her over the course of the afternoon. It had started with mild professional appreciation and had moved incrementally into something closer to reassessment. What do you need from me? Second unit of PRBCs when the blood bank confirms, Emily said, and stay close. He nodded and didn't leave. That was new too. The blood came up in 11 minutes. Emily ran it carefully, monitoring for transfusion reaction, watching Marsh's pressure with the specific patience of someone who has learned that willing numbers to change does not make them change faster. Terrence charted in real time. Price stood at the foot of the bed and was, for once, quiet in the right way. Marsh's pressure responded better to the blood than to the fluid. By 2:18 p.m., it was holding at 94/60, which was not good but was workable, which was all they needed it to be for the next 11 minutes. At 2:21 p.m., the OR called to say they were ready. At 2:23 p.m., Emily helped move Marsh's bed toward the elevator, walking alongside it with one hand on the IV pole and her eyes on the monitor clipped to the rail. Voss fell into step beside her in the corridor without being asked. He's gonna make it? Voss said. Ask me in 3 hours, Emily said. Carter. She looked at him. The DA's office is already in the building, Voss said. His voice was low, paced to the movement of the gurney and the background noise of the corridor so it wouldn't carry. And Internal Affairs has been briefed on the body camera footage. Emily kept walking. How much of it? All of it. From the time Boone walked in to the time the code orange was called, and then everything after. The elevator doors opened. Emily and Terrence moved the bed in. Voss stayed in the corridor. Internal Affairs is going to want a statement, he said, as the doors began to close. I know, Emily said. The doors closed. She came back down 22 minutes later, which was faster than expected. Morale had Marsh and didn't need Emily in the OR. That wasn't her domain, and she understood the boundary. She rode the elevator down in the specific flatness that follows an acute crisis when the adrenaline has metabolized, but the situation is still unresolved, and there's nothing to do but wait and keep working. The department had changed again in her absence. There were 3 people she didn't recognize near the administrator's corridor. Suits, not medical. One of them with a city lanyard that she clocked from 15 feet away. A second cluster near the nurses' station included 2 people in Ashford City Police Department Internal Affairs. Plainclothes that she also recognized on the basis of experience rather than introduction. The slightly too careful posture, the small digital recorder being held at the side, the way they were talking to Sandra without it looking exactly like an interview. Sandra was answering questions with the particular careful precision of someone who has realized partway through a conversation that the conversation matters. Emily walked to the nurses' station, and Sandra looked up, and the expression on Sandra's face was something between relief and a kind of troubled solidarity. "They want to talk to you," Sandra said. "I figured." "Emily," Sandra dropped her voice. "I told them about this morning, all of it. The corridor, the thing with the patient's wife, what he said to you at the station." She paused. "I'm sorry if I should have asked you first." "You did the right thing," Emily said. She looked at the 2 plainclothes officers. One of them, a woman in her 40s, dark jacket, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, had been watching Emily since she came off the elevator. The woman walked over now. "Nurse Carter?" She held up credentials briefly. "Detective Lena Farrow. Internal Affairs, Ashford City PD. Do you have a few minutes?" "I have about 10 before I need to check in with 2 of my patients," Emily said. "That enough to start?" "It's enough to start," Farrow said. "Us." They used a small conference room off the main corridor that Patrice had cleared. Farrow sat across from Emily with a notepad and a recorder on the table between them, and her partners, a younger man named Ortega, who wrote everything down in a separate notebook, sat to the side. Farrow was methodical. She went through the morning in order: arrival time, initial contact with Officer Boone, what was said, what actions were taken, what Emily observed in terms of Boone's conduct during the Code Orange. Emily answered each question precisely and without elaboration. "Yes," he said, "stay in your lane. Yes, he called me sweetheart. Yes, he physically restrained a civilian woman in the treatment corridor. Yes, I verbally intervened. No, there was no physical altercation between Boone and myself. Yes, I can describe the patient whose care I believe his presence delayed. She was not emotional. She was not embellished. She was exactly what she had been in every high-stakes situation that day: accurate." Farrow watched her with the evaluating attention of someone who was used to witnesses performing their stories and was recalibrating for someone who wasn't. "Nurse Carter," Farrow said, setting down her pen briefly, "we've reviewed approximately 3 hours of Officer Boone's body camera footage from today. I want to be straightforward with you. The footage is significant." "Okay," Emily said. "I also want to ask you something that is not part of the formal record." Farrow glanced at Ortega, who put his pen down. "We're aware of the federal presence in this building today. We're aware that it appears to relate to you in some capacity." Emily waited. "We're not asking you to characterize that or discuss it," Farrow said. "But if there are elements of your background that are relevant to the complaint Boone filed against you, it would be helpful to know that those elements exist, even if we can't know the details." Emily looked at Farrow, looked at the recorder on the table. "There are elements of my background," Emily said, "that are classified." Farrow nodded once. "Thank you." She picked her pen back up. They finished in 8 minutes. The corridor outside the conference room was busy enough that Emily almost missed what was happening near the ambulance bay. Almost. But the particular quality of the raised voice cut through, because she had spent the morning calibrating her attention to exactly that frequency, the sound of something requiring intervention. Boone was at the ambulance bay entrance. He was talking to Voss, or rather, he was talking at Voss, and Voss was listening with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the other person to finish. Emily came around the corner in time to hear Boone say, "I don't know who you people are, but whatever you think gives you the right to walk into this building and, Colonel Marcus Voss, Voss said. He said it without inflection, the way you say a fact. Defense Special Operations Command, and you're going to want to lower your voice. Boone's jaw tightened. I don't answer to. No, Voss said. You don't. But the federal security review that now includes your body camera footage, you answer to that. He paused. And so does your department. Silence. The kind that has weight. Boone saw Emily. His expression went through several things in rapid succession. Recognition, the instinct to attack, and then something that stopped the instinct. Something he hadn't had to use often. Restraint. This is connected to her, Boone said. He said it like an accusation. Everything that happened in this building today is connected to everything else, Voss said. That's generally how days work. Emily didn't say anything. She looked at Boone with the same expression she'd had on her face at 10:12 a.m. when he'd first pointed at her. Assessing. Not angry. Not vindicated. Just looking at a situation clearly. Boone looked back at her, and this time the look was different. Not recalibrating. Not dominant. Something she hadn't seen on him yet. Uncertain. You planned this, he said. I planned a 12-hour shift, Emily said. The rest of the day happened. She walked past both of them toward the nurses' station. At 3:15 p.m., Administrator Dale Kovach called an emergency department briefing. He was a trim, careful man in his late 50s who had run Summit Valley for 7 years by managing up successfully and managing down adequately, and today had produced a situation that fell entirely outside both of those skill sets. He stood at the front of the staff lounge with Patrice beside him and Pharaoh's partner Ortega visible through the glass of the door, and he said the following things in a tone designed to sound composed. That a federal security matter had intersected with the day's events at Summit Valley Medical Center. That Internal Affairs was conducting a review of a separate personnel matter related to an Ashford City Police Department officer. That all staff who had been present during the morning shift might be asked to provide statements. That the hospital's legal counsel was available to any staff member who had concerns. He did not say Emily's name. He did not say Boone's name. He did not say what not say Boone's name. He did not say what the federal matter was. What he did say, near the end, with slightly more difficulty than the rest, I also want to acknowledge that the response of our emergency department staff during today's mass casualty event was, by any measure, extraordinary. 3 critical saves that our attending physicians have specifically credited to nursing staff in this department. He paused. That won't go unrecognized. The room was quiet for a moment. Sandra looked at Emily. Emily was looking at the table. Felipe, sitting 2 chairs down, was staring at his hands with the specific expression of someone replaying the morning in a new light. Patrice said when Kovach finished, "Questions?" Boone, who had been standing at the back of the room, left without asking one. He found the hospital's family chapel, a small room near the main lobby, and it was empty, and he went inside and closed the door and stood in the dim light with his hands on the back of a chair and looked at the wall. He was not a man who examined himself often. He'd built a career and a self-image on not needing to, on the confidence that his read of situations was correct and his authority in them was appropriate. He was not corrupt. He genuinely did not think of himself that way. He had never planted evidence, never fabricated a report, never done the things that real bad cops did. He was rough. He was dismissive. He was, when the situation gave him the opportunity, the largest presence in the room. He had looked at Emily Carter at 10:12 a.m. and seen something he could reduce, and he had been wrong in every possible direction. And the evidence of that wrongness was now inside a federal record and an internal affairs file and the memory of everyone in the emergency department who had watched him be wrong across 6 hours. He sat down in the chair. He sat there for 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes and 50 seconds longer than he normally sat with anything uncomfortable. Then he got up and went to find Pharaoh. Morale came down from the OR at 4:47 p.m. She found Emily at the nurse's station finishing documentation on 2 of the morning's cases. She pulled up a chair and sat down beside her, which was unusual enough that Emily looked up. "He's stable," Morale said. "We controlled the bleeding. He'll be in ICU for at least a week. But he's going to make it." Emily let out a breath that she hadn't known she was holding. "You made the right calls today," Morale said. All of them. The pressure threshold, the transfusion timing, not moving him too early. She paused. I've seen attendings miss what you caught on Marsh. I got lucky on the timing, Emily said. Don't do that, Morale said, not unkindly. You know the difference between luck and training. Don't call one the other. Emily looked at her. Where did you train? Morale asked. She said it in the tone of someone who already has a partial answer and is checking it. Emily was quiet for a moment. Combination of places, she said. Morale studied her for another second, then nodded and stood up. ICU team is solid. They've got him. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. Good shift, Carter. She left. Sandra was at the far end of the station and had heard all of that. She did not say anything, but she was looking at Emily with the expression that had been building all day. The expression of someone who has revised their understanding of another person so many times in a single day that the revision has become the understanding. At 5:09 p.m., Voss appeared at the nurse's station. Emily was reviewing a chart. She didn't look up. The DA's office has everything, Voss said. Boone's body camera footage, Farrow's documentation, 3 staff witness statements, the incident report from this morning. What's the DA looking at? Misconduct, obstruction of medical care, abuse of authority? Minimum. They're still reviewing. Voss put both hands flat on the counter, a posture that was not natural for him. He was leaning in instead of standing back, which meant what he was about to say was not official. Carter, there's something else. She looked up. We ran a standard background verification on Boone as part of the security review, standard protocol when a law enforcement officer is present during a federal incident. Emily waited. He has a prior, Voss said. Not criminal, internal. 2 previous misconduct complaints, both from 2019, both involving excessive force allegations against individuals from the Delwood area. Both were reviewed and closed without disciplinary action. Emily set down the chart. The department had them. They closed them. She said it without surprise. They had them, Voss confirmed. Emily was quiet for a moment. Those people, the 2 complaints, do they know any of this is happening today? Voss looked at her steadily. Not yet. They should, Emily said. Voss nodded slowly. That's not my department. No, Emily said. But maybe it's the DA's. She picked up the chart again. Voss was quiet for a moment, then, I need to brief you on something, officially. Emily put the chart down again and turned to face him fully. The department was in its late afternoon rhythm around them, the pace of an ER settling after a crisis day. Still busy, but the specific edge of mass casualty had lifted. People were tired, the kind of tired that comes from having held something terrible together and now beginning to feel the weight of what that took. Voss said, The investigation into the Route 9 incident, the preliminary forensics came back an hour ago. Emily had known, somewhere under the surface of the day's cascade, that this moment was coming. The tanker's axle failure was not mechanical, Voss said. The axle was compromised. It's being classified as a deliberate act. The words sat in the air between them. Marsh was targeted, Emily said. Marsh was one of 3 people on that road with a connection to the operation he was advising, Voss said. The other 2 survived without serious injury. Marsh was the one with the most specific knowledge. He paused. Which means whoever did this either got lucky with the targeting or they knew his route. If they knew his route, then there's a leak somewhere in the chain, Voss said. Yes. Emily processed that. The implications spread out from it in multiple directions, none of them comfortable. What does that mean for his security in the ICU? We have people there. Ashford City PD. No, Voss said. Ours. Emily nodded. Voss said, It also means that today is not over in the sense we were hoping it was. The department's overhead lighting was starting to shift into the slightly warmer register of late afternoon. Emily's shift ended in 51 minutes. She thought about that with the distant, peripheral awareness of a person who already knows the number is not really meaningful. What do you need from me? She said. Before Voss could answer, the radio on one of his people crackled. The man near the ambulance bay entrance, the one who'd been there since they arrived. He touched his earpiece and turned toward Voss, and whatever the message was, the way Voss's face changed was subtle but specific. "We have a problem," Voss said. And from the ICU upstairs, a code alarm began to sound. It was a different alarm than the department alerts, higher pitched, more urgent. Emily was already moving toward the elevator before the second tone. Voss was right beside her. Behind them, in the corridor near the ambulance bay, Boone had come back out of wherever he'd been. And he saw them moving, and he saw the look on Voss's face, and some old survival instinct made him take 3 fast steps forward. "What's happening?" he called. Nobody answered him. The elevator doors opened and Emily and Voss stepped in, and as the doors began to close, Emily turned and looked back at the department she'd been working in since 6 that morning. At the nurse's station where Sandra was already on the phone. At Felipe, who'd stopped walking and was looking up at the ceiling the way people do when an alarm comes from above. At the corridor where she'd spent the day catching things that other people missed and being called sweetheart and filing responses to formal complaints and keeping people alive. The doors closed. The elevator started moving up. Voss's hand was inside his jacket, not on a weapon yet, but close. "Tell me what the radio said," Emily said. Voss said, "Someone accessed Marsh's room 15 minutes ago, used a staff credential. They're still in the building." Emily looked straight ahead at the elevator doors. 51 minutes left in her shift, and the day had just become something else entirely. The elevator took 19 seconds to reach the 4th floor. Emily counted them without meaning to. An old habit, the kind you develop when seconds are the unit of measurement that matters. Voss was on his radio for 14 of those seconds, voice low and clipped, the language compressed into the shorthand of people who have rehearsed for situations like this without knowing exactly which situation it would be. The doors opened onto the ICU corridor, and the first thing Emily registered was wrong. It was too quiet. ICU corridors have a specific ambient, monitors, the soft percussion of ventilators, the movement of nurses between rooms. This corridor had all of that, but the human layer was missing. The nurses who should have been visible at the station were either inside rooms or pulled back, and the 2 federal personnel who had been stationed near Marsh's room were now at the far end of the corridor in a posture that said they were containing something rather than guarding against it. Voss moved ahead of her. Emily moved with him, not behind. The door to Marsh's room was open. The ICU nurse assigned to Marsh, a woman named Greta, whom Emily recognized from interdepartmental shifts, was standing outside it with her arms crossed over her chest and the specific expression of someone who has been told to wait and doesn't agree with that instruction. "What happened?" Emily said to Greta. "Someone came in with a housekeeping credential," Greta said. Her voice was tight. 45 minutes after he came out of surgery. I was pulling his meds, and when I came back, the room had been accessed. I checked the badge log. Who was the credential? Louis Serna, housekeeping, 3rd floor. But Serna was in the building's east wing when the log shows his badge used up here. Greta's jaw was set. Someone cloned his access. Voss's man was already inside the room, moving methodically, checking the IV lines, the connections, the monitors. Emily stepped in past him. Marsh was where she'd left him. Sedated, intubated, lines intact. The monitors showed stable parameters. At first pass, everything looked untouched. Emily went to the IV tree. She checked the primary line first. Patent, running at the correct rate. No visible contamination. Then the secondary port. She stopped. There was a residue at the secondary port injection site. Faint, barely visible. The slight tackiness of something that had been pushed through and not flushed completely. She leaned closer without touching it. "Voss?" she said. He came to her side. "Look at the secondary port." He looked. He reached for his radio. "Get a toxicology consult up here and a sample kit," Emily said to Greta, who was in the doorway. "Don't touch that port. Flag it for the lab as a potential contamination event." To Voss, "I need to check his vitals trend from the last 45 minutes. She went to the monitor and pulled the trend view. Marsh's heart rate had a small, anomalous rise approximately 31 minutes ago. A brief climb from 72 to 88, then back down. Subtle. The kind of thing a busy ICU nurse pulling medications during a post-crisis shift might not notice against the background noise of a full floor. Something went in, Emily said. Small dose, not immediately lethal, probably not the intent. More likely a marker or a partial. She was thinking out loud, which she didn't usually do, but the situation was moving fast enough that thinking in silence was a luxury. If it was a full termination dose, he'd be in arrest by now. He's not. What does that mean? Voss said. It means whoever accessed this room either didn't have enough time to complete what they came to do, or they weren't here to kill him. They were here to take something or leave something. She straightened. Has anyone checked him for recording devices? Voss turned to his man. The man immediately moved to Marsh's bedside and began a systematic physical scan, methodical, trained, without disturbing the lines or the tube. He found it in 40 seconds. Taped to the underside of the bed rail, on the left side, approximately where a staff member doing a line check would rest their hand. A device the size of a thick coin, matte black. Transmitter, Voss's man said. Voss took one look at it. Don't remove it yet. Emily understood. If it was transmitting, removing it told whoever was on the other end that it had been found. Can you trace the signal? She said. Working on it, Voss said. He was already on his radio again. Greta appeared at the door with the sample kit. Emily took it, swabbed the secondary port with the precision that the kit required, sealed it, labeled it with the time and Marsh's identifier. Then she stood up straight and made herself think past the immediate room. Someone had been in this building since before the federal team arrived, possibly since before the Code Orange. The cloned credential meant preparation. This wasn't opportunistic. Whoever placed that device had known Marsh would be here, had prepared access in advance, and had gotten in and out of the ICU in a window narrow enough that Greta's medication pull was the only gap. That level of preparation required inside knowledge. Voss, Emily said. She kept her voice down. Marsh's routing here was a redirect from Meridian General. Who knew he was being sent to Summit Valley? Voss went still. Dispatch logged it, he said. Paramedic crew, receiving hospital notification. Who in your operation knew? A pause, the kind that means the question has landed somewhere uncomfortable. 3 people, Voss said. 3 people who aren't in this room, Emily said. Voss looked at her steadily. She looked back. Neither of them said the word leak again because they didn't need to. The next 20 minutes were controlled urgency. Voss's team worked the transmitter signal while maintaining position around Marsh's room. A toxicologist from Meridian General was reached by phone and walked Emily through a differential for the residue while the sample was being processed. The working hypothesis was a low-dose sedative additive, something that would have kept Marsh under longer than intended and potentially masked early neurological recovery signs. Not immediately lethal, but interfering with his ability to communicate if he woke up, if he had information someone needed him not to share, which meant they needed him to wake up eventually, which meant he was still useful to someone. That was, in its horrible way, good news. Emily relayed the toxicologist's differential to Greta and the ICU attending, a careful older man named Dr. Farnham who had arrived at some point during the crisis and was managing the situation with the specific dignified steadiness of someone who has worked in intensive care long enough that unusual is not the same as unmanageable. He ordered an additional tox panel and adjusted Marsh's monitoring parameters. At 5:38 p.m., 13 minutes before the official end of Emily's shift, Voss's man traced the transmitter signal to an active receiver in the hospital's east parking structure. The receiver was in a car. The car was registered to a private security contractor company based in Crestfield, 2 states away. Emily heard all of this standing in the ICU corridor, arms crossed, back against the wall, running the day backward and forward simultaneously. The explosion, the redirect, the credential clone, the transmitter, the contractor car. The picture wasn't complete, but it was legible enough. Marsh had been targeted. He'd survived. The follow-through had been attempted here, had been interrupted, and now someone was sitting in a parking structure 200 feet away, waiting to see whether their device would tell them anything useful before they decided what to do next. You need to get them now, Emily said. If they realize the transmitter's been found, team is already moving, Voss said. And then his radio gave 3 fast clicks, and Voss's face did the thing that faces do when an operation has resolved faster than expected. We have them, he said. Emily exhaled. It was not relief exactly. It was the specific decompression of someone who has been operating in a sustained state of threat awareness and has just received confirmation that the most immediate threat vector has been neutralized. It felt like setting something heavy down. Her shoulders dropped by approximately half an inch. She didn't sit down. Not yet. At 6:02 p.m., 2 minutes past the end of her shift, Emily Carter was sitting in the same small conference room where she'd spoken with Farrow that afternoon. And this time there were more people in it. Farrow was there. Voss was there. A woman from the DA's office named Assistant District Attorney Priya Bansal, who had arrived at Summit Valley at some point in the last hour and had the manner of someone who had reviewed all available documents in transit and was now ready to act on them. An Administrator Kovacs, who was present because he legally needed to be, and was doing his best to look like a participant rather than a witness to his own hospital's day. Bansal led it. She had a structured way of speaking that was not unfriendly but was extremely efficient, as though she had learned early that efficiency was the kindest thing you could offer people in complicated situations. She confirmed the elements of the case against Boone first: body camera footage documenting multiple incidents of misconduct, 3 corroborating witness statements, the specific incident with the civilian woman in the treatment corridor, and Boone's own conduct during the mass-casualty event, including documented interference with patient care flow in 2 instances, and the creation of a physical obstruction that had contributed to a brief delay in equipment access during a critical intervention. She also confirmed that Boone had come to Farrow voluntarily that afternoon, had sat down, had made a partial statement that did not fully acknowledge his conduct, but had not attempted to contradict the footage. Farrow described it as a man who had run the math and realized that denial was going to cost him more than limited cooperation. His employment status is a department decision, Bansal said. But based on the footage and statements, the DA's office is prepared to file formal misconduct charges. The severity will depend on the outcome of the medical review regarding patient impact. Kovacs said, "What does Summit Valley need to do?" "Provide formal documentation of any patient care delays attributable to Officer Boone's conduct during the Code Orange," Bansal said. "Your attending physicians, Nurse Carter, and your charge nurse, Patrice Odom, would be the primary sources." Kovacs looked at Emily. Emily said, "I'll write the documentation tonight." Bansal looked at her with the evaluating attention she'd been applying to everyone in the room. "Nurse Carter, I want to make sure you understand the scope of what you'll be asked to provide. This is not a complaint review. This is a formal proceeding. Your statement will be entered into the record and may be used in disciplinary and legal proceedings against Officer Boone." "I understand," Emily said. "There will likely be pressure from the police department to limit the scope of the investigation. They'll want to characterize today as an isolated incident." "There are 2 prior complaints," Emily said, "from 2019, both closed without disciplinary action." Bansal's attention sharpened slightly. "How do you know that?" "Colonel Voss's team identified them during their security review." Bansal looked at Voss. Voss confirmed it with a nod. "The complainants from 2019 should be contacted," Emily said, "if they're willing to participate." Bansal wrote something down. "I agree." She set her pen down for the first time. "You've had a considerable day, Nurse Carter," Emily said. "The day had a lot going on." Something almost like a smile crossed Bansal's face. It did. She gathered her papers. "We'll need your formal statement by end of day tomorrow. Everything else follows from there." Boone heard about the arrest in the parking structure at 6:19 p.m., standing in the hospital lobby, waiting for the confirmation that his prisoner had been formally transferred to county lockup, the administrative task that had brought him to Summit Valley that morning, and had then become entirely irrelevant to everything else the morning became. The news came through department radio, sanitized but legible to anyone who knew how to read police scanner language. 2 individuals detained, federal operation, Summit Valley Medical Center adjacent. He looked out the lobby window at the parking structure and saw the residual activity of a federal takedown. Vehicles repositioning, figures moving in the late afternoon dark that came in early in February. He stood there for a while. The prisoner transfer had been confirmed an hour ago. There was no operational reason for Boone to still be in this building, but he was still in this building, and he knew why. even though he wouldn't have said it in those terms to anyone, including himself. He was trying to understand what had happened to the day. He had walked in that morning as one kind of person, in one kind of situation, with one kind of story about who had power in which rooms. None of that was intact anymore. The elevator opened and Emily came out. She saw him. She didn't change direction or speed. She walked to the lobby and stopped near the front desk to pick up something from her mailbox, a piece of interdepartmental mail, probably nothing urgent, and Boone watched her do it, and she knew he was watching her, and neither of them pretended otherwise. He crossed the lobby. She turned before he reached her. Not startled, just tracking movement, the way she'd been doing all day. "Carter," he said. He'd stopped using the professional courtesy of nurse at some point during the afternoon and hadn't gone back to it. "Officer Boone," she said. He stood there for a moment with his hat in his hands. Literally, he'd taken it off in the lobby at some point and was holding it by the brim. It was a small gesture that meant nothing or everything depending on the person. "I talked to Pharaoh," he said. "I know. I'm not going to—" He stopped, started again. "I said some things this morning that were out of line." Emily looked at him. The lobby was active around them. Late shift arrivals, family members heading to the elevator, the volunteer at the information desk typing something. No one was watching them specifically, but the conversation had no privacy either. "You did," Emily said. Boone's jaw worked for a second. He was a man who had spent a career being right by volume and authority, and the mechanism of walking something back was not well developed in him. It showed. "I didn't know who you were," he said. And that was the wrong sentence, which Emily had expected but still had to hear before she could respond to it. "That's not the variable," she said. He looked at her. "You didn't need to know who I was," Emily said. "The part that was wrong didn't depend on my background. It was wrong at 10:12 a.m. before you knew anything about me." She wasn't angry. Her voice was the same voice she'd had all day. Level, specific, not performing anything. "A badge doesn't put you above the people saving lives in this building. That's not about me. That's about any nurse in that corridor." Boone held her gaze. It cost him something visible. "Yeah," he said. "Just that." Emily nodded once. "Your statement to Pharaoh matters more than this conversation," she said. "Make it accurate." She picked up her mail and walked toward the elevator. Boone stood in the lobby holding his hat and watched her go, and there was nothing left in his posture that was dominant or certain or sure of anything much. Patrice was in the charge nurse office at 6:45 p.m. when Emily knocked on the open door. Patrice looked up from what appeared to be 6 simultaneous documentation tasks and gestured at the chair across from her desk. Emily sat. They looked at each other for a moment with the specific familiarity of two people who have been through something together without having been through it together. "Marsh is stable," Emily said. "I heard." Patrice put her pen down. "Kovacs told me about the DA meeting. I'll have the documentation ready tomorrow." "I know you will." Patrice paused. "Emily, can I ask you something directly?" "Yes." "How much of your military background are you allowed to talk about?" Emily considered that. "Some of it. The federal people today. Voss. The way they were with you." "I served alongside units attached to his command," Emily said. "Multiple deployments, before I left service." "Why did you leave?" The question was direct. Patrice asked it the way she asked clinical questions. Not out of nosiness, but because she believed that understanding context made her better at her job. Emily was quiet for a moment, not evasive, working out how to say something true in the available words. "I got to a point where I'd seen enough," she said. I'm not saying it was too much. I don't mean it that way. I mean, I'd done what I went to do. And I wanted to keep doing the work without the part where people are actively trying to kill the people you're trying to save." Patrice was quiet. "The ER is not that different," Emily said, "in the ways that matter." "Except today it kind of was," Patrice said. Emily almost smiled. "Except today." Patrice looked at her for a long moment. Patrice was 53 years old and had been a charge nurse for 19 years, and had hired hundreds of people and been wrong about some of them and right about others, and she had a specific feeling about the ones she'd been right about that she rarely articulated. "When I hired you," Patrice said, "you had a gap in your employment history. You didn't want to talk about your background, and you gave references I couldn't fully verify." She paused. "I hired you anyway." "I know," Emily said. "You want to know why?" "Not particularly," Emily said, "but I think you're going to tell me." Patrice laughed, a short, genuine sound, the first genuine laugh of the day. "Because you spent the entire interview asking me about the patients instead of the salary." Emily looked at the desk. "The complaint against you is going to be dismissed," Patrice said. "Formally, with documentation. I've already started that process. Kovacs is behind it." "I wasn't worried about the complaint," Emily said. "I know that too." Patrice picked her pen back up. "Go home, Emily. You've been here 14 hours. Emily stood up. At the door she stopped, turned. "The two patients from the prior Boone complaints," she said. "In Delwood. Someone should make sure they know what's happening." Patrice looked at her. "I'll mention it to Bansal." Emily nodded. Left. She was in the locker room, changing out of scrubs that had 3 people's blood on them, and her own sweat, and 14 hours of a day that would take several days to fully process, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it anyway, because the day had trained her to treat unknowns as potentially urgent. "Nurse Carter," a man's voice, calm, measured. "My name is Harlan Dietz. I'm the deputy director of the oversight division that was working with Dr. Marsh." Emily sat down on the bench. "I've been briefed on today's events," Dietz said. "I want to thank you formally for your role in Marsh's stabilization and in identifying the access breach." "Voss's team found the transmitter," Emily said. "After you suggested looking for it," Dietz said. "Yes." A brief pause. "I'd also like to discuss something with you. Not tonight. Tonight you should go home." He said it like a man who knew what 14-hour days in crisis conditions cost and was not performing consideration. "But in the next few days, there may be an opportunity that would be relevant to your background and your current skill set." "What kind of opportunity?" "A liaison role," Dietz said, "between civilian medical facilities and federal emergency operations. When situations like today arise, and they will arise given the current landscape, there's a significant gap in operational capacity, someone who can function in both contexts." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I have a job," she said. "I'm aware. Summit Valley is not being asked to release you. This would be consultative, as needed." Another pause. "You don't have to answer now." "I know," Emily said. "Is Marsh going to be all right, fully, when he wakes up?" "We believe so. The talks panel is preliminary, but the ICU team is optimistic." "Oh, good." Emily looked at her scrubs on the bench beside her. "I'll think about the offer, Mr. Dietz. That's all I'm asking." He gave her a number. "Good night, Nurse Carter." He hung up. She sat in the quiet locker room for a moment. The hospital sounds were muffled through the walls. Distant monitors, a PA announcement, the rumble of a food cart, the specific white noise of a building that never fully stops. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sandra. "You still here?" She typed back, "Leaving now." "Sandra, Price wants you to know the construction worker from this morning, Webb, his pneumothorax resolved, going home tomorrow." Emily stared at that for a second. "Good," she typed. She stood up, put on her jacket, gathered her bag. In the parking lot, at 7:21 p.m., she sat in her car for 90 seconds before starting it. The parking structure across the way still had 2 federal vehicles positioned at the exit. The operation wasn't fully wrapped. Probably wouldn't be tonight. She started the car. Her phone rang again, different number. Local area code. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "Emily Carter?" A woman's voice. Older, cautious. "Yes." "My name is Doris Waverly. Someone from the district attorney's office gave me your number. I hope that's all right." A breath. "I filed a complaint against an Ashford city officer in 2019. His name was Derek Boone." Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. "Ms. Waverly," she said, "I'm glad you called." And on the other end of the line, Doris Waverly began to talk, slowly at first, and then with the gathering speed of someone who has been waiting a long time to say something to someone who she believes might actually do something with it. Somewhere on the fourth floor of Summit Valley Medical Center, Alton Marsh's monitors ran their steady lines in the dark. In the Ashford City Police Department, a formal review board had been convened, its membership confirmed by email at 7:06 p.m. 4 members, 1 civilian representative, and a department legal counsel who had already been briefed by Farrow on the body camera footage and had described what he saw using the specific careful language of someone who knows what is coming and is trying to prepare for it rather than prevent it. And in the hospital lobby, the volunteer at the information desk was finally turning off her terminal for the night, and she paused as she did to look at the ER corridor, at the lights still on, the staff still moving, the unremarkable ongoing work of a building that had held something very heavy today and had not broken under it. She didn't know most of what had happened. She knew the day had been hard. She turned off the light and went home. Doris Waverly was still talking, and Emily was listening, and the name Derek Boone moved between them like something that had been locked in a room for 5 years and had finally found a door. And behind Doris Waverly, on the phone, in the background, Emily heard a second voice, older, male, asking who she was talking to. "Someone who can help," Doris Waverly said. And in the morning, when the review board convened and Farrow walked in with her documentation and Bansal arrived with her case file, and the body camera footage began to play on a screen in a conference room across the city, Derek Boone would be sitting at a table with a department lawyer who had already told him, quietly, in the hallway outside, that the 2 prior complaints had surfaced and that the complainants had been contacted, and that the advice going forward was to cooperate fully. Boone had sat with that information for 30 seconds. Then he'd asked, "How bad is it?" His lawyer had looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has delivered bad news often enough to have developed a standard way to frame it, and had said, "Bad enough that cooperation is the best available option." Boone had nodded. But none of that had happened yet. What had happened was this. Emily Carter was sitting in a dark parking lot at 7:24 p.m., listening to a woman she had never met tell her about a day in 2019 that had been, in its way, not entirely unlike today. An encounter with Derek Boone that had cost Doris Waverly something she had not fully gotten back, and as Emily listened, she felt the particular weight of a day that was not yet over settle more firmly into the structure of something that would eventually be resolved. Not tonight, not cleanly, not without more work and more statements and more hours in rooms with lawyers and review boards and all the machinery of accountability that moves slowly and incompletely and still, somehow, moves. But it was moving. She could feel it. And then Doris Waverly said something that made Emily go very still. "There's one more thing," Doris Waverly said, "about that day in 2019. There was a witness, another officer. He saw everything." She paused. "He filed his own report internally. I don't know what happened to it." Emily said carefully, "Do you know the officer's name?" Doris Waverly said, "Garza, first name Marcus. He left the department in 2020. Emily said, "Do you know where he is now?" And Doris Waverly said, "He's still in Ashford City. He called me last week, actually. He said he'd been thinking about coming forward for a while. He said he was waiting for a reason." The parking lot was quiet around Emily's car. "Ms. Waverly," Emily said, "can you get me his number?" Doris Waverly texted the number 11 minutes later. Emily sat in the parking lot long enough to save it, then drove home through Ashford City's late evening streets with the particular hollowed-out quality of someone who has run on adrenaline for 14 hours and is only now beginning to feel the floor of herself. The city looked the same as it always looked at this hour. Gas stations and traffic lights, a convenience store with its sign half-lit, the overpass on Route 7 that was not Route 9 and had not exploded this morning and therefore looked entirely ordinary and was somehow startling in its ordinariness. She ate cereal standing over the kitchen sink because she didn't have the architecture of a real meal in her at that hour. She showered. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at Marcus Garza's phone number on her screen for approximately 2 minutes. Then she called him. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd been expecting a call, or was the kind of person who always answered, or both. "Mr. Garza," she said. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm a nurse at Summit Valley Medical Center. Doris Waverly gave me your number." A pause. Not long. "I know who you are," he said. Word gets around. His voice was mid-40s, unhurried, with the specific quality of a man who has been carrying something for a while and has gotten comfortable with the weight of it. She said you filed an internal report in 2019. I did. What happened to it? Another pause, longer this time. It got lost, he said. That's the polite version. What's the impolite version? Sergeant Helming reviewed it, sat on it for 6 weeks, told me the allegation was unsubstantiated, and suggested I think carefully about my next performance review. A flat delivery, not bitter, just accurate. I left the department 8 months later. Emily looked at the wall of her bedroom. The DA's office is building a case, Bansal, Priya Bansal, ADA. She needs your report and your testimony. If the report exists anywhere. I kept a copy, Garza said. I kept it because I knew I was going to need it eventually. Another pause. I just didn't know what eventually would look like. Emily said, It looks like right now. He was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. It was not dramatic. It was the sound of a decision that had already been made years ago and was only now being confirmed. I'll contact Bansal tomorrow morning, he said. You got her number? Emily gave it to him. Carter, he said before she could hang up. What you did today at that hospital said it was on the news. The Route 9 response. They didn't name you, but the paramedics talked. A brief pause. You're the reason some of those people are still alive. Emily didn't know what to do with that sentence, which was not a new problem. She had never known what to do with sentences like that. They landed in a place that she didn't have easy access to. Get some sleep, she said. Talk to Bansal. She hung up. She lay down without setting an alarm and was asleep in 4 minutes. The review board convened at 9 the following morning in a conference room on the 6th floor of Ashford City Police Department headquarters. The room had institutional carpet and overhead lighting that made everyone look slightly worse than they were, and it held 7 people, 4 board members, including a civilian representative named Willa Marsh, who was no relation to Alton Marsh, and who had been on the board for 3 years and was known for asking questions that made department legal counsel uncomfortable. The department lawyer, a man named Fetterman, Farrow, who was there as the lead investigator, and Boone. Bansal was not in that room. She was in a different room, 3 floors down, with Garza and his copy of the 2019 internal report, and a court reporter and 2 of her own staff. She had called Farrow at 7:30 that morning to tell her that Garza existed and that the report existed, and Farrow had taken 45 seconds to absorb that information and then said, with the measured precision that was her professional signature, I'll need that before 10 a.m. She had it by 9:15. The review board was 90 minutes in when Fetterman asked for a recess. He came back from the recess having spoken to someone on his phone in the hallway, and his demeanor had changed in the specific way that legal counsel's demeanor changes when new information has arrived and the new information is not good for their client. Boone watched Fetterman sit back down. He had known, walking into this building this morning, that the day was going to be bad. He had known it the way you know things that you can't prevent, the way you feel the shape of consequences before they fully arrive. He told his wife last night in the kitchen of their house in the Linwood district that he was in trouble, which was not something he had ever said to her before in 11 years of marriage. And she had looked at him across the table with an expression that was not surprise, but was something he found harder to read than surprise. Fetterman leaned toward him now and said quietly, There's a second complainant and a corroborating officer report from 2019 that is now part of the DA's file. Boone looked at the table. Marcus Garza, Fetterman said. The name landed. Boone hadn't thought about Marcus Garza in 3 years, which was itself a choice. Not a conscious one, but the kind of forgetting that happens when you decide repeatedly not to look at something. Okay, Boone said. Fetterman looked at him. Okay. I heard you, Boone said. The board reconvened. The civilian representative, Willa Marsh, asked Boone to walk through his actions at Summit Valley Medical Center from the time of his arrival to the time of his departure. She did it with the patient, structured attention of someone who had done this before and was not going to be rushed or deflected. Boone walked through it. He did not embellish. He did not minimize significantly. He told the board that he had been dismissive of nursing staff on arrival, that he had used language that was inappropriate, that he had positioned himself in the treatment corridor during the mass-casualty event in a way that created obstruction, and that his complaint against Nurse Carter had been, he paused at this word, found it, used it, retaliatory. The room was quiet after that last word. Willa Marsh wrote something down. Farrow watched Boone with the careful neutrality she applied to everything in formal settings. And underneath the neutrality was the specific satisfaction of a person whose investigation had been thorough and was now producing the outcome that thoroughness deserves. Emily was back at Summit Valley at 6:15 a.m. for her next shift. She had slept 5.5 hours, which was less than ideal and more than she'd gotten in worse situations. Sandra was at the nurse's station when she walked in, and Sandra handed her a coffee without being asked and said, "Marsh is awake." Emily stopped walking. "Since 4 a.m., Sandra said. ICU team said he's confused but responsive, neurologically intact." She paused. "Voss's people have been up there since 5. Emily nodded, took the coffee. "Also," Sandra said, "Price left you something." She pointed at the nurse's station mailbox. Emily pulled out a folded piece of paper. Price's handwriting, which was the handwriting of a man who had once had good penmanship and had gradually sacrificed it to volume and speed. "Carter, splenic bleed patient from yesterday, Morera, is stable. Surgical team is pleased. You were right about the guarding pattern. GP." Emily folded the paper and put it in her pocket. She went to work. The shift was nothing like the previous one, which was both a relief and faintly disorienting. The absence of crisis after crisis sometimes takes adjustment, the way your ears ring in the silence after sustained noise. She did her work. She moved through the department with the same economy she always brought to it. She checked on 2 of the previous day's patients who had been admitted to monitored beds. She supervised a newer nurse's first independent IV placement with the particular attention of someone who knows that the way you learn things matters as much as what you learn. At 10:40 a.m., Patrice appeared at her elbow and said, "Kovac wants to talk to you at noon." "What about?" He didn't say exactly, but he used the word formal twice, so Emily drank her coffee. The Ashford City Police Department issued its official statement at 11:18 a.m. It was 3 paragraphs published on the department's public communications channel and distributed to local press. The relevant sentences were these: that Officer Derek Boone had been placed on immediate unpaid suspension pending formal disciplinary proceedings, that the proceedings would incorporate findings from an internal affairs investigation, body camera footage, and multiple witness statements, and that the department took seriously its obligation to the communities and institutions it served. The statement did not mention Summit Valley Medical Center by name. It did not mention Emily Carter. It did not mention the 2 prior complaints or Marcus Garza's 2019 report. But Bansol's office released a separate statement 40 minutes later that mentioned all of those things in the specific direct language of a prosecutor who has the evidence to support every word she puts in public. And that statement named Boone, named the prior complaints, named Garza as a corroborating witness, and described the conduct at Summit Valley Medical Center in terms that included the phrase deliberate obstruction of emergency medical care. By noon, both statements were on the local news. By 1 p.m., they were being picked up by regional outlets. Emily didn't see any of it during her shift. She didn't have time, and she didn't have the habit of checking news on her phone during work hours. She found out the way she found out most things that happened in the hospital. Sandra told her, in the corridor outside room 4, with the phone in her hand and the specific expression of someone delivering news they've been waiting to deliver. "It's out," Sandra said. "Both statements. His name is public." Emily read the headlines without reading the full articles. She handed Sandra's phone back. "Okay," she said. "That's all you've got? Okay?" Emily thought about it for a moment. "It's what needed to happen," she said. "The okay is that it happened." Sandra looked at her for a second. "You're a strange person, Emily Carter." "I know," Emily said. She went back to room 4 too. Kovac had arranged the noon meeting in his office on the administrative floor, which Emily had been to exactly once in her 14 months at Summit Valley, for a routine performance review that Patrice had technically run while Kovac sat at the end of the table and nodded at intervals. The office was unremarkable, the furniture of someone who had furnished it to signal stability rather than taste, a window that faced the east parking structure, a framed mission statement on the wall that nobody in the building had read since it was put up. Patrice was there. Morale was there. And a third person Emily recognized from the previous afternoon, one of the executive staff members who had emerged from the administrative corridor looking like they'd received unsettling information. She was a compact woman in her late 40s named Gail Ono, and her title, Emily recalled from her badge, was Director of Clinical Operations. Kovac opened by saying, "Thank you for coming on short notice." Emily sat down and didn't point out that she hadn't been asked so much as notified. Kovac said, "I'll be direct. Summit Valley is in the process of formalizing its mass casualty response protocols. Yesterday exposed some significant gaps in how we handle security coordination, federal liaison, and cross-departmental triage authority during Code Orange events." He folded his hands on the desk. "We're also looking at how our nursing staff, specifically our senior trauma nurses, are utilized and authorized during high-intensity situations." Emily looked at him. "We want to create a formal role," Gail Ono said. She had the directness of someone who has been brought into meetings specifically to move them forward. Trauma Emergency Training Coordinator, Senior Clinical Oversight during mass casualty events, with the authority to direct triage protocols across nursing staff. Additionally, the role would carry responsibility for developing and running the department's trauma simulation program. "We don't have a trauma simulation program," Emily said. "That's part of what the role would build," Patrice said. She was watching Emily with the careful attention of someone who has been part of a decision and is now observing how the person it concerns receives it. Emily looked at the table for a moment. "Is this connected to what happened with Boone? Because if this is It's not a settlement," Ono said. "It's a restructuring that your performance yesterday made necessary regardless of anything else that happened." A brief pause. "Though everything that happened yesterday is related, that's honest." Emily appreciated the honesty. It was the kind she could work with. "What does it mean for my floor work?" she said. "You'd split time," Patrice said. 60% clinical, 40% program development and training. You'd keep your patient load. The coordinator function activates during Code Orange or equivalent events. "And the authority question," Emily said. "During a mass casualty event, what does the authority actually look like?" Ono and Kovac exchanged a brief look. "You'd have the formal right to direct triage priorities across nursing staff and to redirect attending physicians' patient assignments during the acute phase of a mass casualty event, subject to the medical director's override, but practically speaking, the medical director wasn't in this building yesterday when you were making the calls." Emily sat with that. It wasn't the military. It wasn't what she'd had in that life. The structure, the clarity of chain of command in extreme situations, the shared language of people who had trained for the worst together. This was a hospital in a mid-sized city with institutional carpet and a broken helipad and a nurse's station that ran short every flu season. But it was the work, the same work, the keeping of people alive in the time between when something terrible happens and when the world catches up to it. She thought about Renata Solano and her daughter's school, about Marcus Webb going home tomorrow with his shoulder immobilized and his chest clear, about Alton Marsh awake on the 4th floor, confused but intact, alive because 38 minutes of work in Bay 2 had held the line long enough for morale to get there. "Okay," Emily said. Kovac nodded, visibly relieved in a way that told Emily he'd been uncertain how this would go. "There's a ceremony," Patrice said, 3 weeks from Friday. The hospital board wants to formally recognize the staff response to the Route 9 incident. Multiple staff, not just you. It's a department recognition, but your name is going to be specifically noted." "Does it have to be?" Emily said. Patrice looked at her. "Yes," she said. "It does. 3 weeks move the way 3 weeks move when you are doing work that matters, and the days have weight to them." Marsh was discharged from the ICU after 9 days, transferred to a secure medical facility for continued recovery under circumstances that Emily was not fully briefed on and did not need to be. Voss called her once during those 3 weeks, a brief call, functional. The investigation into the Route 9 attack was proceeding. 2 individuals had been charged. The contractor company in Crestfield was under federal scrutiny. He said, "The offer from Dietz stands when you're ready." She said, "I'll think about it." She was still thinking about it. The formal misconduct proceedings against Boone concluded in the 3rd week. The outcome was a matter of public record: termination, effective immediately, for abuse of authority, obstruction of emergency medical care, and conduct unbecoming. The 2 prior complaints from 2019 were reopened and formally sustained, which meant they entered the permanent record and closed the door on any appeal process that depended on characterizing the Summit Valley incident as isolated. Doris Waverly's attorney called Emily to tell her the outcome, which Emily received the same way she'd received most things about this particular thread, with the quiet recognition that it was right and with the understanding that right and easy are not the same category. Marcus Garza called her himself the evening after the termination was announced. "How do you feel?" Emily asked. He was quiet for a second. "Weird," he said, "like I thought I'd feel finished, and instead I just feel like it took too long." "It did take too long," Emily said. "Does that bother you? That it took all of this, all of yesterday, all of you, all of the federal thing, to make one bad cop face consequences?" It was a real question. He was asking it genuinely. Emily thought about it for a moment. "Yes," she said. "And I think the answer to that is that we do it again the next time. Faster if we can. Better than we did it this time." She paused. "The machinery is slow. That doesn't mean it doesn't move." Garza was quiet. "You did the right thing in 2019, Emily said. "You were the only one in that department who did. That matters, even when it doesn't feel like it." "It didn't feel like much," he said, "for a long time." "I know," she said. "It still matters." He thanked her and hung up. Emily sat in her apartment and thought about that for a while. About what it means to do the right thing in a room where no one supports it and nothing comes of it immediately, and you carry the weight of it for years while the person you reported keeps doing what they do. About how that particular form of courage is unglamorous and grinding and gets no ceremony and produces no immediate result and is, in some ways, harder than anything she'd done in a trauma bay. She thought about the fact that Garza had kept a copy of that report for 5 years, not because he thought he'd definitely need it, because he'd known the right thing to keep. The ceremony was on a Friday afternoon in Summit Valley's main atrium, a space that doubled as a lobby and overflow waiting area and was now, for 2 hours, holding approximately 90 people, board members, medical staff, administrative staff, several of the recovered Route 9 patients who had been well enough to come and had wanted to. Renata Solano was there, her hairline scar still visible above the makeup she'd carefully applied. Marcus Webb was there with his arm in a sling, standing beside a woman who was probably his wife and who kept looking at the people around her with the expression of someone trying to identify which specific person was responsible for her husband being alive. Colonel Voss was there, in uniform. He had not been asked to speak, but he'd shown up, which was its own statement. Dietz was not there. That was consistent with how he operated. Gail, Ono, and Kovacs spoke. The medical director spoke. There were 7 staff members being recognized by name, and each recognition was specific. Not the vague exceptional service language of institutional ceremony, but the actual actions, the actual moments, with the kind of specificity that tells people in the room that someone paid attention. When they got to Emily, Kovacs read from a document that she suspected Patrice had written, because it sounded like Patrice, precise, unadorned, with the specific detail that only comes from someone who was there. That nurse Emily Carter had performed a needle decompression on an incoming patient ahead of diagnostic confirmation, correctly identifying tension pneumothorax on clinical assessment alone in the first 14 minutes of the mass-casualty event. That she had identified and flagged a splenic injury in an ambulatory patient who had not presented with critical symptoms. That she had identified a developing compartment syndrome before the vascular surgery consult had been reached. That she had managed the acute hemodynamic crisis of a critically injured patient for 41 minutes with appropriate interventions and escalation in conditions that pushed against the facility's equipment capacity. And that her identification of a potential contamination event in the ICU and her specific suggestion to sweep Marsh's room for surveillance devices had directly led to the apprehension of 2 individuals and the prevention of further harm to a federal patient. The atrium was quiet. Emily sat in the row of chairs with the other recognized staff and looked at her hands in her lap. She was not good at this. That was true, and she had made a degree of peace with its being true. The receiving end of recognition had always felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, not uncomfortable enough to leave, but not natural either. She had spent nearly a decade in situations where what you did mattered more than whether anyone knew you'd done it, and the habit of that was deep enough that public acknowledgement still felt, on some level, like a translation error. But she looked up when Voss walked to the front. He hadn't been on the program. Kovacs looked slightly surprised. But Voss had the quality of a man who doesn't disrupt rooms unnecessarily, and so the fact that he was walking to the front meant he had decided it was necessary. He stood at the front of the atrium and looked at Emily directly. "In the operations I have been part of," Voss said, "the people who make the difference in critical moments are rarely the people who announce themselves beforehand. They're the ones who've already done the work, who've built the capacity over years, often years nobody sees, and then apply it when the situation demands it." He paused. Nurse Carter served alongside some of the finest operational personnel this country has produced. She was exceptional in that context. She is equally exceptional in this one. He looked at her steadily. "The people in this room are lucky she chose it." The atrium applauded. Emily looked at Voss and gave him a nod that meant, "Thank you, and also, you didn't have to do that." He gave her a nod back that meant, "I know, and I did it anyway." Afterward, in the corridor outside the atrium, Renata Solano found her. Her daughter was with her. Maybe 9 years old, dark-haired, watching the world with the focused attention of a child who is slightly too young for the social script of an event like this, and therefore slightly more honest about it. Renata took Emily's hand, held it. "You told me she knew I was okay," Renata said, "before you left the room." "I did," Emily said. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Renata's daughter was looking at Emily with the direct appraisal of someone who has not yet learned to disguise curiosity as something more polite. "Are you the one who fixed my mom?" she said. "A lot of people helped your mom," Emily said. "But you were the one," the girl said. "Certain. The way children are certain about things." Emily looked at her for a moment, at the absolute confidence of it. "Yeah," she said. "I was part of it." The girl nodded, satisfied, took her mother's hand. They moved toward the elevator. Emily stood in the corridor. Sandra appeared beside her from wherever Sandra materialized from at moments like this, an ability she seemed to have that Emily had stopped being surprised by. "How are you doing?" Sandra said. Emily thought about it. The actual answer, not the functional one. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm actually okay." Sandra nodded. "You know what I noticed about you," she said. "From the first time you walked onto this floor, you moved through bad situations like you've already survived worse." "I have," Emily said. "I know that now." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Does it get easier, the surviving worse?" Emily looked down the corridor, at the ER doors at the end of it, at the light coming through the frosted window panels, at the permanent, unceasing work of the place she had chosen. "No," she said, "but you get better at knowing what to do with it." Sandra absorbed that. "Come on," Sandra said. "They brought food. Actual food, not the vending machine stuff. Felipe got a whole tray of those mini sandwiches." Emily followed her back toward the atrium. She started the new role on the following Monday. The first thing she did was walk through Summit Valley's emergency department with a notebook and document every gap she could find in the mass-casualty protocol. Equipment staging, authority chains, communication delays, the specific moment when triage logic broke down under volume pressure. She filled 11 pages. She brought the notebook to Patrice and they sat down together for 2 hours and built the outline of the first training module from it. It was not glamorous work. It was close reading of failure, which is harder than it sounds because failure resists narrative and has rough edges and doesn't resolve into clean lessons without sustained attention. Emily had a tolerance for that kind of attention. She had built it the hard way and she knew how to use it. Dietz called again in the 4th week. She told him she'd take the consultative role, with conditions. Her clinical work at Summit Valley remained primary, she maintained the right to decline any specific engagement, and the arrangement stayed informal enough that it didn't change how she showed up to work in the morning. He agreed to all three. On a Tuesday in late February, 3 weeks after the ceremony, Emily was in the middle of a shift when a call came in from the ambulance bay. Multi-vehicle accident on the Caldwell interchange. 4 incoming, 1 critical. She heard the call and felt her body shift into the familiar calibration without deciding to. She met the first gurney at the door. The patient was a man in his late 30s, conscious but fading, with the specific gray-white color that means internal bleeding is winning against whatever is trying to hold it back. He looked up at her, and his eyes had the wide, fixed quality of someone who is afraid and is trying not to show it to the person they're hoping will help them. "You're here," Emily said to him. Not "you're going to be fine," not a promise she might not be able to keep, just the fact of it. "We've got you. Tell me where it hurts." He told her. She was already moving before he finished the sentence. Behind her, the ER doors swung open, and the department absorbed the next crisis the way it had absorbed the last one. Imperfectly, under-resourced, with staff who were tired and human and doing the work anyway, because the work was the thing that needed doing, and they were the people there to do it. Emily Carter did not need anyone in the room to know what she'd done before this moment. She did not need the ceremony or the record or the federal recognition or the fact of Boone's termination to do what she was doing right now. She had never needed any of that. She had only ever needed the work, real strength, the kind built over years in places no one photographed, in decisions no one witnessed, in the accumulated weight of choosing to do the right thing when it costs something. That kind of strength doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, and it does what needs to be done.